Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. I am so excited about our guest today, Dr. Sheena Young. And I think probably the best thing that I could do is to let you meet her. So, Dr. Sheena, can you maybe get us started by describing yourself? How do you describe yourself?
Yes, thank you for that invitation. I am Dr. Sheena. My pronouns are she and her. I am joining you from Tongaland, which we know in the colonial name as Los Angeles. I am a Black woman, fluid. I am a creator. I am an aunt, a sister. I am a daughter. I I'm a rare love. I am an embodiment focused psychologist and healer, a mental health futurist, an intuitive, and author. And I am also an Ifa priestess in the Isheshe tradition of Ifa and initiated into Oshun and Obatala.
Wow. That is so much better than any introduction that I could ever possibly do. So those are all every description, right, is so stimulating, and I want to know more. But why don't we go back and can you describe a little bit? How did you come to be interested in liberation psychology and in decolonization? And what about what about your personal history kind of led you to where you are today?
Yes, there's so many parallels and weaving in and out across my own personal journey and who I've become as someone that holds space for folks of the global majority. When I was in graduate school, I was constantly navigating competing energies between my intuition and the science of the field of psychology. And as a novice clinician, I was being taught to ground my orientation and approach to therapy and evidence based practices or practices that were deemed legitimate through, rigorous research as we know in clinical trials. And I refer to this often as, European supremacist education, which often felt like an act of betrayal to anchor my clinical orientation in theories that uh, were rooted in the white experience. And so I started to explore centering my intuition, self determination, spontaneous insight, and the body's narrative. And I found that this was my own journey in freedom. And later, as I continued to grow into myself and into now having a private practice, these years of study, living, healing, experimenting, channeling, unlearning, and being guided by elders, teachers, I landed with this decolonized approach, later learning that word decolonized, right? So now I work from a mind, body, heart, spirit care perspective.
That's incredible. I totally get. So you're in college and you're
Mm-hmm.
learning this European traditional. There's a for sure all as therapists we've been through the universities and kind of know what that's like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what? But then you began listening to your intuition, and you said that it felt like kind of betraying yourself. Did you already
Yes.
know that going in? Like, did you already have a sense of yourself kind of strong enough and defined enough outside of this European model and the colonized model that you already kind of came in knowing that, or was that something like how did that emerge?
Yeah, yes. It's interesting. I was in a master's program at the University of Houston, and I was studying to be a counselor in Houston. And I remember often having these thoughts about, but what about this and what about that? Or this feels like they're leaving this out. And also being present and understanding my experience being a Black woman in the world, there was a point in that master's program where I said, I know if I'm going to be taken seriously in this work with what I described as my quirks and eccentricities in how I view the world, how I'm often thinking about the body and spirit and just these things that I wasn't hearing discussed in my classes, that I would work into my papers and my assignments and my presentations. I knew that if I was going to be taken seriously, that I would have to go on to get a doctorate degree. And it's an interesting thought to a place to return to now. As I look back in hindsight, what I was saying to myself is I needed the credentials so that people would take me seriously. But I now know that this was um, the liberation, the self determination, the intuition was already there. I just was needing a little bit more confidence to live from that place, right? So, moving forward and matriculating through my doctorate degree, I continued to push and pull, and I'm fortunate to have had some professors that really supported me in that, and others who didn't understand it. But here I am.
That's incredible. So your story picks up. By the way, Houston. It's so interesting because we're based in Austin, and I'm
Okay.
sorry, but I'm not remembering the indigenous name off the top of my head. Oh, I can almost get
It's on
it.
the tip of your tongue.
It is. It's not Alabama Cushata. That is also part of Texas, but on indigenous land, so many of these people, like I had no idea you had any connection to Texas. And so many
Mm,
of these people that I'm talking to, they started in Austin or, you're in Houston. I was from Houston. So anyway, but before you got into your master's in Houston, can you say anything about kind of your earlier life and your earlier relationships that helped seed some of this confidence and this intuition
yes.
but then sprouted as you developed?
Yes, I knew as soon as you started asking me that I felt myself smiling. I just love talking about little Sheena, and she's one of my greatest teachers in general, but particularly around embodiment. So I was a little one who was often described as too smart for your own good. And I know that a lot of that had to do with that I could read a room. I could intuit and sense into things that I didn't have the life experiences for. I would ask questions that made people uncomfortable and was often met with silence or that phrase, Sheena, you're too smart for your own good. And so that while I didn't grow up in a family that was nourishing my relationship with my intuition, my own curiosity and spirit really held the space for me to continue to expand in that. And I'm so grateful for that. And I was also a young person who was growing up in different homes raised by the women in my family. And I have experienced quite a bit of trauma myself. And I noticed how when my mom was able to enroll me in dance classes at a very young age, I would be feeling some tension. I didn't have the words. I just knew I was feeling something, right? And I'd go to dance class. I never wanted to leave. I would be sad when class was over, but I noticed that I felt different, right? And while I didn't have the language for that, I knew that something was happening. And those are very potent seeds that sprouted into how I work now, how I view the world, how I view healing. There was something about that connection between my emotions and my body, and the way that I could do this thing that I loved in movement and alchemize the things that I didn't have the consciousness or understanding for at such a young age.
Mm. Oh, beautiful. right? That you could express it before you had language for it.
Yes. Yeah. And similarly, being that young, intuitive little girl who was able to read a room, and also, I often say body language is one of our first languages. So I could and needed to kind of scan the room, scan the people in the space to know whatever I needed to know or to predict, right? So that I could keep myself safe. And that has just been such rich wisdom that I've been able to carry forward in my work.
Mm. I love you smiling and thinking of little Sheena. It's
Mhm.
it's so beautiful. Have you, if you don't mind my asking, been in therapy with a traditional white therapist before?
I have. Yes, my very first therapist was a white woman in Houston. Hmm.
And what was that experience like? Like I'm building up to kind of this contrast, I guess. But
Yes, I appreciate that. Um, Yes, it's so interesting to think about, right? At the time, I started. Let me backtrack. My very first counselor was when I was in undergrad, and fortunately, was a Black woman in the counseling center at the University of Texas at Austin, actually. And
Austin, there it is again. Holy
yes,
mackerel.
and then once I graduated college and moved back to my hometown in Houston, I felt like I still wanted to continue doing some work. And I found a therapist who was a white woman, maybe in her 30s at the time, maybe late 30s. At that time, I didn't really know anyone else that was in therapy. And so this was quite a journey, right? Quite a leap, with something that at the time I wasn't telling other people that I was doing. And I'm fortunate that it was a soft place for me to land. I did have a positive experience with her. I believe she did the best she could to support me. And also, I remember feeling when I would talk about certain themes or experiences that I had in my life that she couldn't possibly understand what I was saying, what I was talking about, the depth of how it, impacted me and those that I loved and cared about. And so sometimes I may have decided to talk about those things, and other times I omit it as well. Yeah, one
Hmm.
thing that stands out in particular is I talk about this all the time. My relationship with anger is still pretty new, right? The allowing myself and expressing anger is new. Um, and so I remember bringing up feelings of anger there, and not we kind of just stayed on a superficial space plane. So interesting to think back about
That's
that.
right. So she sort of joined you in colluding to like, let's just keep that over there in that corner.
Yes, let's keep it, let's keep it tight. We can't let it be wild. Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm. That, do you think that there would have been anything she could have done to help make it safer for you to talk about these experiences that you would know that couldn't, um, that she couldn't personally identify with? You know what I mean? Like, I guess what the question is like, is it just the nature? And there's probably not a lot she could have done just because of the differences. Um,
Mhm.
or were, you know what I mean? Do you think that there is, like, had she been schooled on liberation psychology and those sorts of things, could have made it safer for you?
Mhm. Yeah, I think inherently there would always be limitations, right? But I firmly believe in the more that we unlearn, the more that we decolonize our minds, bodies, hearts, and spirits, the smaller those gaps may feel. Even, in the tangible space, they can still be quite large. But on a human to human, heart to heart level, I think there are definitely things that we can do to shrink that space, to shrink the alienation and the experience of catastrophic, harmful distance. And I think that I need to hold on to that hope right now, especially in the world that we live in. Um, I One of the things that I do a lot of sharing about is the way the power differential, this idea that there's an expert in the room, this the ways in which, you know, folks in Black bodies and BIPOC bodies have been conditioned to externalize their trust, to shrink or repress their intuition. And we are asking, what do you think? Tell me what to do. What advice do you have for me? Right? That any time that that dynamic is nourished and fed, I think it moves us away from where we want to be going, which is supporting liberation and self-determination and intuition as a compass in the on anyone's healing journey, but particularly for folks that have been marginalized and harmed by white supremacy, colonization, and the contemporary descendants of that. One of the things that I remember about this therapist that did support, it was something really small, and I didn't understand it. Now I do. That she did. She didn't wear shoes. She didn't wear shoes. She was barefoot in her space, and the first time I went, I kept my shoes on, and all the times after, I would take my shoes off, which meant that, culturally, I can fold my legs in the chair or in the sofa where I was sitting and felt more comfortable. And now there's just so much symbolism for what it means to take your shoes off in a space before you enter a sacred space. And I don't know what her intentions were, but I'm grateful that I can recall that as a one way that she helped me to feel safe.
I'm so touched by that because it is an example of her being a little disruptive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's not kind of just totally traditional. You know, you've got to dress like a social worker or whatever. You know, I mean, that there is a script, and going shoeless is certainly not in that particular script. So it's that what it sounds like. I don't know for obviously for her, but that the signal was this something about that she was comfortable enough with herself to. I mean, that's what I'm
Yes.
making up. I don't know, but it's but I guess like it's something going outside of the the signal was something. Yeah, this isn't going to be just we're not going to fake it
Right.
or something like
Right.
that.
And whether, I never asked her about it, but whatever I might be speculating, surmising, or projecting, was impactful for me, right? I think more so as I think about it is that um, it gave me space to be authentic and comfortable and to find a way to be, comfortable at best at home in that moment that I
Mhm.
was, calling my healing space. So, so grateful for that.
Yeah, and that your body responded to it like it was a signal of safety that you could then come and inhabit the chair in a way that felt comfortable to you. That's
Yes.
it's such a great like such I love like tiny examples like this. It's because it really helps bring home the point about. So I would like to hear more about when you're talking about unlearning and
Mhm.
using intuition and embodiment. Um, can you share a little bit more about that? Some of these principles that you have evolved into.
Yes, absolutely. So I often talk about my work being anchored in pillars of authenticity, truth, self determination, and intuition. And I am so adamant about bridging this contemporary world and medicine that we have with the ancient wisdoms that are rooted in indigeneity, for me, for myself in particular, African ancestry, and doing so with integrity and respect, and in ways that, like that merges, that joins in a really beautiful way, in a way that brings freedom, right, to people. So, my personal intention and mission for my work is to help people feel at home and free in their bodies. I find it quite logical to want to escape a place that holds generations of rage and pain, these bodies that we live in, and also these bodies that have targets on them, and also these bodies that can remind us that the world insists on seeing us as broken. And so I work with folks from the place of wholeness, right? I was just telling someone earlier, they were describing themselves as broken. And I invited them to consider um, how brokenness potentially is an adjective for how they feel. And what could potentially be true is that they're trying to remember their wholeness, which is different. It's a subtle difference. And so this mind, body, heart, spirit approach has really been such a strong foundation and place for me to sprout up and grow into and transform and share with others. So I think about the mind as the place that we most know in this work, how we think about ourselves and the world, how the world touches how we think and see and believe. And often that means that we're internalizing these untruths, these lies, right? The body is one of my favorite places to spend time and talk about how life manifests in the body physiologically, physically, also energetically through our energy centers and chakras. And then the heart piece is about relationship with self and others. So often themes of betrayal, abandonment, hurt show up there, those heart to heart ruptures. And then lastly is the spirit piece, which is about our relationship with a higher power, God, deities, our higher self, our sense of purpose, our intuition, and also our ancestors. And so I am exploring this whole terrain with folks through the work, and this can happen individually, through couples and partner work, with organizations, and in workshop series and groups that I hold for survivors. And it's really beautiful. I now say, if all of my clients or people that have worked with me were in a room full of other people, they would be able to recognize each other by some of the language that we speak, right? In wholeness, in self determination, authenticity, and truth.
It was funny because I thought you were gonna say they'd be able to recognize one another before they spoke, because I was
Mm,
imagining, you know what I mean, that there's a physical presence that's actually different when you inhabit your body.
absolutely. I think that could very well be true, and that just lights me up inside to imagine. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, that's a what a wonderful. So who, um do you have any particular teachers or, like, bodies of, um, outside of university, right? This is like the unlearning. Were there communities or teachers in particular that facilitated your process?
Mhm. Yes. So many teachers, those in this realm, and also my ancestors, who I call the second authors of my book, are so vibrantly present for me. I'd love to name my advisor and dissertation chair from my graduate program, Dr. Shantae Deloach Blankson, and also Dr. Pam Nezelhowski. And I had a special relationship with Dr. Todd Dubose, who was the chair of the concentration, one of the concentrations I had, which is an existential theory. And now I know that some of the roots of existential theory are very much in indigeneity and African traditions. But he was, quite a lovely cove for me during that time. He spent, I believe his dissertation chair was Dr. Cornell West. So you can imagine the synergy and, the magic of having his support as well. And then there's a whole host of other mentors that I've spent time with and have taken me under their wing, including Dr. Tama Bryant, who just completed her term as the president of the APA. And that's been such a special relationship. And then there are the teachers, the literary teachers like Bell Hooks, who I would consider myself in. I think about lineage a lot. And so I have a cool story I'd love to share that with you as we're thinking about teachers. Uh, I just like dreamt of the day when Bell Hooks would hold my book in her hands as someone who writes about many of the themes that we're talking about here, and also as a survivor of sexual trauma herself. And her best friend, Toni Cade Bambara, who wrote Salt Eaters, was a mentor of the person that wrote the foreword for my book, Aisha Shahida Simmons. And when I invited Aisha to write the foreword, I always get a little emotional saying this, but when I invited her to write the foreword, she mentioned Toni Cade Bambara, and she has an altar for her, and she talked about how she would be proud and feel venerated. And so I consider myself in that lineage, and I feel that they are so proud of this work that I have created that will bring healing to many generations. Also, the works of Audre Lorde and Clenora Hudson Weems, who is the person that I first learned about Africana womanist theory through, which is another root of my work. So these are just a few of my favorite folks. My bookshelf is full of many, many
Hmm.
more, but those are just a few.
Well, I love you mentioning them, and with this notion of lineage and future and past, and connecting those things. So
Mhm.
now you work with a lot of primarily, or maybe exclusively, BIPOC women. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, I work with,
Black
folks.
women in particular.
Exactly. Yeah, most of my time is shared with Black folks living in female bodies who identify as women. But I also work with, BIPOC, non-binary folks as well.
Hmm. So I would imagine that this would be a population that has been, well, I'm not imagine, I know that has been harmed financially by their status and have been kept out, not necessarily everybody, but as a group. So
Mhm.
how do you set up without the help of like an organization or something like that? Like, I, I guess what I'm getting at is like, how are you able to be this generous and be able to be so giving with a community that it might be difficult to support you and to support your work?
Yeah, this is another place where those paths kind of, weave in and out my own personal work and journey with the work that I'm doing and who I want to be in support of my community and the world. I, am on this constant journey of unlearning scarcity and um, and really grounding and believing and expecting abundance, which as a Black woman in this world who grew up in a working class, middle class family by single women, that has been a really challenging feat. And I then made a decision after feeling taken advantage of in academia, in the academy, and in my work to take a leap to be an entrepreneur, which is still wild to think about, right? Because I wanted security and also was taking this leap into this space, which continues to be one of the most liberating choices I've ever made. And go into private practice, and I'm trying to figure out how to set a fee and knowing who I want to work with, right? This question that you're asking me. And I'm very grateful that it has been more easeful than not. And I think in part because of this work that I'm doing with myself to honor my value and my worth and to ask for that. And when we need to shift and make adjustments, I have built a business model that allows me to do that, to create some space and flexibility and space for grace. So right now I work on a scale, and there's a bottom of the scale and then there's the top of the scale. Everyone that comes in, I say we're on the honor code. Like when we're kids, I ask that you locate yourself on the scale given your resources, and that will be the fee for session. If life is really good to you and you're bathing in abundance, then you'll let me know that you can slide up. If life takes things in another direction, then we can slide down. And my clients have really appreciated that as well. I also lean into community resources that are available. For example, the Loveland Foundation, the National Queer, Trans, and Therapy Network, which have both offered mental health funding to make therapy more accessible. So they'll offer a stipend to offset the cost for folks who might need it. So in partnership with both of those organizations. And then for some of my other specialized program like Healing on the Mat, which makes me beam every time I mention it, it's a 10-week themed workshop series for BIPOC survivors of sexual trauma. And I have an opportunity for folks to relieve the financial burden by making a monthly contribution or a one time investment in the healing of survivors of color. I think this is really important because, as you know, um, sexual violation to Black bodies, Black women's bodies in particular, is deeply rooted in enslavement and colonization. And I think this is a bridge, an opportunity for community to support investing in the healing of Black bodies. Black bodies, Black beings at home, and their bodies are forces of nature, and we can all benefit from that.
You just said that so beautifully, and I totally agree. And I want to even say that as you're listening, as Dr. Sheena describes, if you've been, if your circumstances are where that you have more than enough, and these, if you're moved by some of what she's talking about and what she can bring people in, have wondered, what can I do to be an ally, and what can I do to help with this liberation? Then here is a really concrete, rather than it being about feelings, it would be about donation, and a direct donation. And so sometimes people will ask, well, why don't, I want to donate to a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you turn your services into a nonprofit? And I certainly have my thoughts about that, but I'm curious. I want to let you
Mm-hmm.
respond to that before we go on.
Yeah,
Why not
so
just going into the
right, as you know, I am operating not as a nonprofit. I have a corporation, and I work for myself. Again, I started this interview off by sharing some of my identities, and I am um, growing into abundance myself. One of the challenges I have noticed is that when folks want to give money or donations, they're often looking for a kickback, right? Or some way that they may directly receive a reward or, a benefit, right? And so I like to challenge people to contribute from the heart without the expectation of a direct financial kickback or gain. And also in understanding that, you know, this money, this currency is energy, it is seeds, it is can be quite powerful when we are grounded in intentions of healing. So, you know, I think it's an opportunity that I hope that people will take up, whether it's to share with me or others, to share without expectation of a kickback, but also relinquishing control over what happens, how, you know, how the money is spent. I'll share with you, Sue. Thanks to your contribution, since we first met, I began a new cycle of healing on the mat. And just completed our second week, going into our third week. There are six folks that are participating who identify as Black, Indian, Chicana, and it's a beautiful group that has come together. But thanks to your contribution, I was able to offset the cost by over 40% for three of those folks that signed up. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to how they'll feel in their bodies at the end of the journey. So thank you so much for that.
You know, you're saying, you know, we shouldn't give for a kickback, but I have goosebumps for what you're telling me. And the idea that anything, you know, that we could do that would be such a direct, I mean, to me, it's the most direct contribution in the world. And I wanted to respond also to the nonprofit thing, because people have asked us, because some of these donations are from corporate profits from the podcast. And so we appreciate our sponsors, but part of why that we have them is to do things like this. And the problem with going back into a nonprofit is that is, again, it goes back into this power over, you know, Western model with oversight and with bureaucracy and with paperwork that is all, you know, top down. It's from the state.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of liberation is that I understand, and correct me any of this, but this is the way that I have thought about it, is that the idea of liberation is that it really is direct. It's community, it's land, it's
Mm-hmm.
nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'm putting my fingers together, you know, like side to side. It's not up and down. And even though a nonprofit, you know, I mean, we know so many nonprofits that are, you know, not nonprofits really, or that
Mm-hmm.
there's a ton of benefit that the people in them are getting. And in this case, I just got a moment to my heart of you sharing just a little bit about a small way that I have been able to contribute to those like real people, actual individual people. So I had no idea that that would happen. That wasn't why we did it, but that kind of power, that's what giving directly can do, whether it be to Dr. Sheena or to any of these other organizations. We have several partner organizations that we give to help provide access to mental health care for marginalized communities. But that's kind of the mission. So
Yeah.
it's really an appeal that if you're listening, if you're moved, you can feel the spirit and the depth. And the idea would be to give as a way of amplifying that beautiful voice and supporting Dr. Sheena and all of the incredibly lucky people that she gets to work with, or any of these other partner organizations, so that we're not sitting on something more than we need when, you know, again, this is fair and equitable. So that's a pitch really quick for, you know, don't want to make our listeners feel too terribly uncomfortable, but a little uncomfortable, right? Like if we're sitting
Just a little
comfortably,
bit.
a little uncomfortable, but really more inspired, more of like an inspiration. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, of course
Yes.
that information will be in the show notes as far as how to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I just want to say, because I can see you and also remember that little Sheena who can feel and sense and intuit. I feel your sincerity and I see that you are moved, and I appreciate that so much. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about hard things, right? But also as an invitation in this spirit of liberation that needs all of us. that requires us to be uncomfortable and to explore our resistance and to consider the ways in which we can bring relief and healing to people that our history has harmed and continues to harm. And when you do so, you support me, and also the folks that I hold space for. So thank you so much for that. I really
Well, thank
appreciate it.
yeah, well, thank you so much. And also that I know I can also sense, this isn't a comfortable space for you. This isn't, I'm sure, um, and again, as you're listening, if you can imagine that, to put yourself out there in such a direct way of like, can we do this together with your hands out? No, you'd have to like really know what you have to offer and know the value of it to be able to do that. It's a really beautiful kind of stance of openness. Like it flows in, it flows out. It's the opposite of scarcity, which is goes back to many of the models that you're talking about. And so, doing that, can you say a little bit more about any of these particular pillars about in your thinking and in your healing and in mental health care delivery in general that you are interested in?
Can you ask me
Yeah,
again?
that was a big
Maybe a
question.
little bit. It's okay.
Well,
I
I'm
want to
I'm
make
trying
sure I
to
understand.
right. I'm really just trying to queue up to help you speak again to any of these other you as you like in your description. You had many different points of
Yes.
contact, right? There's
Yes.
decolonization, there's holistic work, there's ancestral work. So I just thought
Mhm.
any of those that kind of came to your heart, came to your mind, to say a little bit more about what that means, so that for folks that that's new to, that they can be
Yes.
more clear about what that looks like.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, so all of those identities that I named in the beginning and all the roles that I have in my relationships with myself and also community are very much present in my work. For example, I'm finding that in this decolonizing um, ecosystem, this shift, this great shift that's happening, folks are being curious about ancient traditions, right? They're curious about their ancestry. Many folks that look like me don't have the privilege of knowing where our people came from because we were stolen from our lands. And so some of the work is in connecting with intuition and exploring ancestry, realizing that they've been practicing spiritual traditions or like having moments that may be related to ancient wisdoms that of folks of their lineage and their ancestry. So, as I mentioned, I'm an Ifa priestess in the Isheshe tradition of Ifa, which is a Yoruba spiritual tradition that really celebrates connection with ancestors. And it also has like a beautiful support system in what we call Orisha and deities. And we see this in many ancient spiritual traditions around the world, right? Like in Hinduism and Buddhism, or Buddhism, and these deities that are connected to nature, right? And for me, this is so important to reclaim intimacy and relationship with nature. I read something recently that said the earth misses us too, right? The earth needs us and misses us and longs for us too. And so, one of the really tangible ways that I am growing is to explore more about what it looks like to let nature be a part of therapy and healing work. And that just has been so rewarding. I
What
also
does
have
that look? What does
mentioned,
that look? I'm sorry, but what does
yeah,
that look like
okay.
before we?
Yes.
As
So
nature is more,
again, it's been quite intuitive, but I can give you some really tangible examples with folks who might be feeling disembodied, right? One of the things I'll say the tools is remember the ground is there, right? So we might sit on the floor together, right? Or I might invite them. They may say, after a day of working in this environment that I feel like I'm living outside of myself or hovering above myself all day as I'm navigating some of these systems, we might talk about what is supportive for grounding. And so touching your head to the earth, right? And syncing up with the vibrations of the earth. Or it's simply getting outside and feeling the wind, right? And listening to any messages that might come to you. Going to the ocean, right? And putting your feet in to let the salt, take away any negative energy or energy that isn't yours from your day, right? So and if you don't have access to the ocean, imagining that sensation in your mind and in your body. So that's a couple of tangible examples of what that can look like on a day-to-day basis. And each of these elements in my tradition are connected to a spiritual deity, orisha, or guide. So it's quite powerful and inspiring and so magical, even. Yeah.
Well, I can relate. I'm curious about the deity for trees that
Mm,
that I have ritual in my walks and stuff like that. There's particular I have these relationships with these certain trees, and to
mm,
me, I touch them. I just go and
mm-hmm.
literally I have my dogs actually touch them. I
No.
brush them up against. There's something I have this idea of like sharing this energy and thinking in terms of how long the tree has been here, how deep the tree is in the earth, all the things it provides, all just for me, like that's a portal into, I think, something that you're pointing to. So is there a
Absolutely.
deity? Is there a tree deity?
Yeah, so I don't know of one particular tree deity in my tradition, but what comes to mind is an Orisha. His name is Ogun, who lives in the forest. That is his home, that is where he resides and his safe place. He is the warrior of peace and truth and an ironsmith. So he works with, different types of metals, and he helps to clear barriers, obstacles that get in our way and on our path, but that stand between us and embodying and living our truth. So that comes to mind. But also, just if we were in a session together, for example, I would just highlight how powerful your connection is, and ask you, more about what you're intuiting and what you feel when you touch the trees, because that's more important, right?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
don't want to um I don't want to, push my beliefs onto others, but I do use it as a way to, create space and inspire folks, giving themselves permission to be wild in their healing and to think and move differently than they may have been taught, to allow themselves to be brave, to color outside the lines, and
Hmm.
and be curious about what they can discover.
It's a great example of what you were talking about earlier about it's not a top down. You're not going to be you wouldn't have been just teaching me, have an idea and then you're going to teach me something.
Mhm.
That your approach, and one that you're advocating is that we're kind of together in this discovery, and
Yeah.
the user, in this case, it would have, the client, the
Mhm.
would be the expert, and you would be guiding them inward to
Mhm.
discover more versus teaching them, lecturing them, educating them,
Yes.
psychoeducating them. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, it's so rich and transformative to be able to say to someone in the moment, in a room or on Zoom, and what do you feel when you touch the trees? And they say, I feel wise, I feel supported, I feel seen and cared for or nurtured. And can you feel that in your body right now? Where does that live in your body now? I invite you to place your hands there and know that you can return to this place as much as you like next time you need to remember wisdom in your body or strength in your body, right? That's so much more, in my humble opinion, that's so much more powerful than me telling someone about the symbolism of trees and what I
Hmm.
think, right? Yeah, I
Yeah. Oh,
really
I can
appreciate you
totally.
sharing that.
I can totally feel that, but also the what you did share about this deity was actually very stimulating, and I can imagine that for many people that it's I even think about like D&D now being a form of
Hmm.
therapy, right? And I hadn't thought of that before, but like going into archetypes, and that there's something about, because we can't create it, but by having a story or having a narrative or a deity or a character in the D&D example, it it allows possibility that that we didn't have to generate, and so then we can. So there's
Right.
something really exciting even about that part of it.
Yes, and everything is so connected. So even in, the unlearning and decolonize approach, when I'm amongst colleagues or when I am facilitating an experiential workshop or training for folks who are wanting to center decolonizing their practices, I'm inviting them to go back and research some of the roots of what we know now as contemporary psychology theories and ideology. So even archetypes, right? People love Carl Jung, and they don't know that he spent a lot of time on the continent of Africa. And in his earlier efforts, he intended to, he was comparing Africans and Europeans, and particularly with these themes of uncivilized and civilized, or primal and civilized, and representing the unconscious and conscious. And in studying, folks of, Africans at the time, he was exposed to energies and moments that informed what we know as some of his work in, archetypal figures and psychology. So, it gets really deep, Sue. It gets
It
really deep.
does.
So when,
Well, it's because immediately then I go to molecules and molecule assisted therapy or plant assisted therapy, which sounds like it flows
mhm.
right with this.
Yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a movement in the, embracing of psychedelic plant medicines, and in some states, and hopefully soon in others, the decriminalization of some of these plant medicines, right? So we can be in relationship with them in ways that continue to um, bring liberation and freedom forward for all of us. So yeah, what do you want to know? What are your questions about that?
Well, in that particular example, what it makes me think of is robbing indigenous cultures, and
Absolutely.
that, right, like right now you have to, in from my awareness, because it's continues to be illegal. It's all underground, so you have to know someone. It's very expensive, while the plant itself, of course, is available, and so could be something that is an accessible tool for many, many people. The way that
Mhm.
it's coming out now is, it's partly because it's underground. It's being commoditized.
Mhm.
Um, so that was just one kind of side thought that I had, was about the
Mhm.
stealing of indigenous healing models.
Absolutely. Yes, the way that we see the cycle of oppression and the process of colonization, even in this space, where the medicine, much like sacred traditions, songs, music, language, right, and other moments in our country's history in particular, where we saw these medicines become demonized and weaponized and then criminalized. And now we're seeing, this revitalization, and along with that, right, exploitation and extraction of the medicine under the institution of capitalism, right? So there are many folks that I'm in community with who are in alignment, who share the hope that, and the labor and energy and intention of bringing these medicines forward and into our communities with respect and integrity for the communities that they come from, the cultures that they come from, the places, the lands that they come from. and, in ways that can bring healing and undo, hopefully, a little bit of the damage and harm that has happened. These medicines are spirits and energies as well. So we want to be mindful of that. Yeah, it's a delicate time. It's a delicate time. I'm really excited to see what happens, and how we can honor some of the medicine keepers and shamans and indigenous medicine folk that have been doing this work for centuries.
Hmm. And one of the things I really love about how you're putting this out is that there's a lot of invitation for both the deep dive related to working with marginalized communities by marginalized people populations, and so like there's the depth of that, but it also isn't, because sometimes then, when we peel off, sometimes it's easy to then we still have we're still colonized in our minds, so sometimes we can
Mhm.
end up accidentally creating another problem, by reacting away from something. But what I love
Yes.
about the way you're describing it is there's still this, without giving up anything, there's still this
Mhm.
invitation that feels that it can be collaborative, or that it can, that it can cross pollinate, that there's room for other,
Mhm.
without at all giving up, again, the staff of this is also what's really, really important. Is
Right.
that is
What's
that
at this without
intentional?
losing, of
Mm-hmm.
course. Yeah, without losing the center.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, you'll notice that I use a lot of language that is invitational,
Mm-hmm.
that really centers choice. And that comes from, some of my work being rooted in trauma informed care, which is really about choice as a healing portal, right? And so when we invite people in and remind people of their choices, they may feel, versus telling them what to do, they may feel empowered, more empowered to take initiative, to go down the rabbit holes, right? We know that, there is power in practicing choice, right? So, for anyone listening or joining us, in the spirit of the intuition and also the choices that we have and the sacred responsibility, the accountability that we have, in contributing to healing justice forward and backwards. It's there. It is always there, and we don't need permission to access that. But I hope that we'll, collectively keep choosing, even when you step off the path and, like you said, make a wrong choice or a harmful choice, that you are in the practice of coming back where that staff is at the center, which takes care of humanity and sees a world where we can be free.
Well, it's lovely, and this is part of why we're having this conversation, is we want to include as wide of audience as possible in these kinds of conversations. But you also, another way I would highly recommend your book, Body Rights,
Yeah.
as another way in. Can you share a little bit about the book?
Yes, absolutely. And I have a copy here. I'll show. The book is called Body Rights. It is a holistic healing and embodiment workbook for Black survivors of sexual trauma. It was, published by Norton in November of this past year. And the beautiful artwork was created by another, close friend and colleague, and psychologist, Dr. Shaima El Sayed, who is also, just an amazing artist. And the book is a combination of 4 medicine journeys that weaves in so much of what we've been talking about here. So the first journey helps folks settle in, to, embodiment, right? What that is, to help folks to start to gain tools to, be able to pull from for the other 3 journeys. The second journey is an abbreviated version of the workshop series, Healing on the Mat, and bridges trauma informed yoga, really wonderful journal prompts and creative interventions to help folks start to try on the embodiment as a healing path. The third medicine journey explores the impact of trauma on the energy centers and chakras and looks into plant and herbal medicine as a resource, a healing resource. So it has teas, tea recipes, and different journaling prompts as well that help to look into each of the seven primary chakras. And then finally, the fourth journey is one of my favorite. It explores ancestral support and intergenerational trauma and healing as a part of the healing journey. And it's so full. I am just so moved by this work that this morning I was meeting with a client and she said, you know, I say one of the poems that you wrote in the book every day and I add my own little pieces in there, right? Or I received a lovely message from a friend and colleague this weekend who also sent the message with a picture of her younger self, her little girl self. And she shared a moment of joy that she reclaimed, something that came up that she hadn't remembered in a long time. And so this book will heal generations. And I invite folks to, we all know someone that needs this book. Even if you don't identify as a Black survivor, many of us can relate to the themes that come along with that experience. And I think we can all benefit.
Absolutely. I was just was totally just thinking that. And I really encourage if you're listening to go to your independent bookstore or bookshop.org or bookshop.com, I can't remember. Um, and pick up Body Rights. This would be a wonderful, like, if, a lot of times you get inspired and it's like, but you don't know what to do. So donations, like actual material contributions to this kind of work, whether it be here or elsewhere, is a wonderful way to, get off our rear ends and actually do something. This book sounds incredible, and I'm really going to literally get off and order it. I, what stopped me before was I really was thinking of it as a workbook for, like a very specific population, not me. And there was something about, like, it felt a little bit like stealing something. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
mhm,
Like,
mhm,
or a little voyeuristic or something. Like, it didn't feel quite
mm.
like that's those messages are not for me. Those are like, I want to help get those messages out to people who they're for, and I care
Mhm.
about that. But it's interesting. It's just a little interesting. That was what held me
Yeah.
back. But I'm about to go order it right now. So
Oh, I'm so happy for that. And thank you for that transparency. I think those themes and those things that are showing up are worthy of, reflection and introspection. And also, I don't know if you have a private practice, but some folks that might be listening who do work with folks that that identify as people of color that have experienced sexual trauma. I think it's a great complement to therapy. And so some of the folks that I'm working with, their therapists are reading the book along with them as a way to support and provide a journey map for the therapeutic work, as well as just maybe understanding more deeply someone you care about, a friend, that a family member, right? So some of the themes are there. While it does center the Black experience, I think that there's a lot of wisdom and things that we can pull from it.
yeah, it's incredible. So yes, jump on that, Body Rights. And while you're at it, it would pair really well with a the book that Anne and I wrote, "Secure Relating: Holding Your Own in an Insecure World." It's available for pre-order. We have we are being pressed to, like, okay, now is the time you're supposed to order. If you're interested in ordering, pre-orders are apparently very important, and we are getting some pressure of, like, okay, you know. Uh, sorry for pressing that a little bit, but and again, that is, it's so funny you identify this theme, because then I felt like I would be imposing if I get the book. And, I don't want to overstep. And it's the same thing in promoting the book. It's been so hard because, our listeners trust us, and I don't want them to feel manipulated or, like,
Yeah.
anything
That
like
dance
that?
is hard.
Oh
Yeah,
my
that dance is
gosh.
hard. Congratulations. I'm
Thank
happy
you.
for you.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, people see the book and they see it on the website or on the stores and they assume, that people are buying the book, but we need people to show up and buy the book, right? It's the process. Good luck with the
Thank
process.
you. Oh, it's
Welcome.
excruciating. You've been through it.
Yes.
Yes, excruciating. One last quick question, and that
Uh-huh.
may or may not be relevant, but I was
Okay.
thinking about the impact of the color purple, um,
Yes.
and uh, and just if you had anything to say about that.
Yes. Yeah. So I remember reading The Color Purple when I was in ninth grade, um, in as a requirement for my school. I was in a humanities program, and I was enthralled, with as much as I could understand at that time, right? And so much probably went over my head. I also saw the movie as a young person. It felt like one of those cultural rites of passage. Just as a young Black girl, you watch The Color Purple and then watched it many times after that. Um, I think it's really special that as this new, or like the most recent Color Purple movie, the musical came out a month after my book was published, and this version of The Color Purple uh, created, an opportunity for us to see what it looks like, what healing looks like. And it had a lot of the same themes, intergenerational trauma, and then the healing piece as well. And so I have often said I dream of, Oprah holding my book. She identifies herself as a survivor, and Viola Davis, dream of them holding my book as well. And I had the privilege of working with my mentor, Dr. Tama, on creating a healing guide for viewers of The Color Purple, and Body Rights is listed as a resource. So it's a dream, and it feels like a really full circle moment.
Hmm.
So much synergy there.
That is wonderful. I love you putting the dream out there, but it also sounds
Yes.
like you're inching towards it. So
Yes.
I'm gonna dream it for you too.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. And I just am so pleased about the work that you're doing. And I really hope that you get some movement, that people buy the book, and that maybe you'll hear from some of our listeners, even if you just reach out and support and saying, thank you for what you're doing. Um, any kind of community connection and support, I think, is a really wonderful thing. And how would people reach you?
Yes, thank you. So I am on socials at Embodied Truth Healing, which we'll have in the show notes for you. And I can also be reached via my website, www.embodiedtruthhealing.com. On the website, you can learn more about me, my work. You can find a way to connect on the Connect page or make a contribution in support of survivors if you like. And also, I link you to the Body Rights book and some of the sellers that, you might be most familiar with. So I look forward to connecting, and thank you so much for this moment.
All right. Well, thank you for listener. If you're still with us and you appreciate this content, please do hop on and give us a rating and review. It's a great way for other people to discover this kind of incredible content. And all right, we'll see you around the bend.